2,500 Carthaginians had also perished in the fighting. Massive funeral pyres burned well into the night.
When the news of the Battle of Lake Trasimene finally makes itself to Rome, supposedly one of the praetors, who's a city official, got up on the rostra, which is the big stage in the Forum, the center or heart of the city, and he tells the people, very short and to the point, "We have been defeated in a great battle."
After the big disaster at Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, one of the Roman consuls is dead. Another one is on the other side of Italy, and Hannibal's army is nearer to Rome than he is. So the Romans have a problem. They've got a vacuum of power, and they resort to the one institution that violates this principle of the Republic, that no one man should ever have overwhelming power, because they appoint what the Romans called a dictator.
The man chosen by the Roman Senate to serve the 6-month term as dictator was Quintus Fabius Maximus.
Quintus Fabius Maximus was the traditional Roman aristocrat. He represented all the sort of traditions of Roman honor, Roman dignity, and a good deal of Roman caution as well.
He believed that Hannibal's army was superior, and that what the Romans must do to avoid getting beaten was to avoid battle altogether. So what he proposed to do was basically follow Hannibal around and deny him supplies, do anything he can to hamper Hannibal's efforts, but in no circumstances is he going to face Hannibal in battle and hand Hannibal another big victory. Now, these Fabian tactics were successful in the sense that he did not lose any big battles, but they also caused the Romans great and extreme grief because, of course, Hannibal this entire time is burning Roman territory, destroying Roman property, killing some Romans, and obviously the people want action.
At the end of Fabius' 6-month reign as dictator, the Romans elected 2 new consuls and decided to call up an army of twice the usual size. In doing so, they were choosing to renew the war with Hannibal. Soon, the victories at Ticinus, Trebia, and Trasimene would be eclipsed on a battlefield in southern Italy known as Cannae. Following Hannibal's victory over the Romans at Lake Trasimene, the Carthaginian army roamed the Italian countryside unchecked. Village after village fell prey to the Punic invaders as they made their way southward. After a string of defeats, the Romans had chosen to avoid a pitched battle with Hannibal. The Republic could ill afford another devastating loss. Instead, they waged a war of attrition, hoping to deny Hannibal's army food and supplies. By June of 216 BC, Hannibal's capture of the all-important supply depot of Cannae brought about a dramatic shift in Roman strategy. The Romans would no longer seek to avoid Hannibal, they would destroy him. Drawing on Rome's tremendous manpower, the Senate mustered an army of 88,000 men.
It was very clear that the Roman people had decided that this was the year the war should be brought to an end. You do not raise an army that large unless you intend to use it, and to use it quickly. You cannot supply that number of people in the field. They have got to go out and seek decisive battle.
In late July, the massive army set out for Cannae. As he had at Ticinus, Hannibal would face the combined armies of both consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro.
Now, under most circumstances, the 2 consuls would go off and each lead an army and go off and fight in different theaters of operations. It's only when the enemy is really powerful, really threatening, that you send both consuls to the area. When you do that, the 2 consuls have equal authority, which means normally they come to an arrangement so that One holds office on one day, and then his colleague takes over for the next day. So on alternate days, each consul will have power. Now, in a campaign, that can obviously give Roman strategy, Roman planning, a rather sort of spasmodic effect, in that you've got two individuals, perhaps with different ideas, maybe conflicting ideas, who are controlling the army's fate.
Varro supposedly wanted to fight a battle against Hannibal, whereas Paulus wanted to avoid battle unless it was under extremely favorable circumstances.
When Roman forces arrived at Cannae in late July, the circumstances appeared to favor them. They outnumbered Hannibal's army of 45,000 men by nearly 2 to 1. Encamped on a hillside overlooking the Aufidius River, Hannibal showed little concern for the Roman army laid out before him.
One of his officers, a chap called Gisgo, is supposed to look at these and comment on just how many of them there were. Hannibal is said to have said, well, yes, you've noticed that, Gisgo, but of course, amongst all those men, there's not a one called Gisgo. Just implying that somehow the Carthaginians were special, that it didn't matter how many Romans there were, we're just better.
Hannibal's confidence was not misplaced, a fact underscored by a Roman description of his army. To look at them, one might have thought the Africans were Roman soldiers. Their arms were largely Roman, having been part of the spoils at Trasimene and some too at the Trebia. The Gallic and Spanish contingents carried shields of similar shape, but their swords were of different pattern. Those of the Gauls being very long, those of the Spaniards being handily short and sharply pointed. One must admit, too, that the rest of the turnout of these people, combined with their general appearance and great stature, made an awesome spectacle. On the morning of August 1st, Hannibal led his multinational force onto the battlefield at Cannae. The cautious Roman consul Paulus surveyed his enemy's position and decided not to fight.
It's a wise move, and it's quite acceptable. Challenges to battle are frequently turned down in the ancient world. They're only turned down, however, when the opposing army has clearly taken a superior position. Hannibal had chosen his ground incredibly well, and for the Romans to have faced him would have meant certain defeat. The following morning, however, it's a different matter. Varro is now in command, and they decide to take the battle to the Carthaginians. It's gaining a psychological edge. We may not have been willing to fight you yesterday on your terrain, but we'll willingly fight you today on ours.
Varro deployed his men along the banks of the Aufidius River. The Roman general hoped the rugged terrain would neutralize Hannibal's cavalry and prevent them from encircling his infantry. Under the relentless glare of the August sun, the Romans lined up in their standard formation. Given the strength and size of his enemy, Hannibal's success hinged entirely upon cunning and quickness. A head-on attack against the Romans would be suicidal.
He's got a huge problem. The Roman legions are almost invincible in the frontal attack. They're relentless. Nothing will stop them. They'll just keep coming. And in his two previous victories, the Romans had punched through his center.
Fortunately for Hannibal, he had a big advantage both in the number of cavalry and in the quality of his cavalry. Now, what he does, and what is different about this battle, is he sets up his infantry in a crescent shape, facing the Romans. So the crescent comes out towards the Roman lines.
Hannibal rode amongst his men, barking last-minute orders and words of encouragement. A momentary silence engulfed the battlefield. All that stood between the two great armies was a cloud of red dust kicked up by the summer wind.
The Romans approach in a very slow, methodical fashion. They're clashing their shields and spears together. The idea is to generate fear in the enemy.
Suddenly, a hail of Roman spears rained down upon the front line of the Carthaginian army. The Roman center pushed forward an indomitable force.
The Romans keep pushing, and the crescent becomes flatter and flatter, and then eventually turns inside out as the Romans are being pushed into the formation. The Gauls and the Spaniards are backpedaling, very carefully allowing the Romans to be sucked in. Because by being sucked in, the Romans are losing their formation. This is exactly what Hannibal wanted.
On the left flank by the river, Hannibal's officer Hasdrubal led the Carthaginian cavalry to a quick victory against their Roman counterparts. Hasdrubal then raced his men behind the length of the Roman lines to confront the cavalry formed by Rome's Italian allies on the right wing.
The Allied cavalry see them coming. They now see another fresh force of cavalry charging at them, and they break and flee, leaving the main body of Carthaginian cavalry to concentrate on the Roman infantry, which is now exposed. And then Hannibal springs his trap. The Romans are attacked at the sides by the Africans. They're still struggling with the Celts and the Spaniards at the front, and they're about to be attacked at the rear now by the Carthaginian cavalry. This is what's going to absolutely destroy them. They no longer have a sense of direction. The Romans are organized to fight going forward. All of a sudden, they're going to find themselves fighting on four fronts. They have no momentum, and they're trapped. They don't know which way to go.
What you have is the famous double envelopment of Cannae. The Roman army, though much more numerous than the Carthaginians, is now trapped amongst these Carthaginian soldiers.
The Romans can't see anything. They're surrounded in a haze of dust. There's nothing more terrifying to soldiers in battle than the feeling of impotence, the feeling that you're being attacked and cannot defend against it.
The fighting continued for the rest of the day. When the dust cleared, 50,000 Romans lay dead.
This was the single bloodiest day in ancient warfare. You've got a field which is probably 2 miles wide, maybe 3 miles deep, and covered in blood and corpses and screaming, moaning, dying men.
In his epic history, The War with Hannibal, Livy described the battle's horrific aftermath. There lay those thousands upon thousands of Romans, foot and horse indiscriminately mingled. Here and there amidst the slain, there started up a gory figure whose wounds had begun to throb with the chill of dawn and was cut down by his enemies. Some were discovered lying there alive, with thighs and tendons slashed, baring their necks and throats and bidding their conquerors drain the remnant of their blood.
You've even got particularly strange things happening where Roman soldiers were found dead, having dug holes in the ground and buried their heads in them, apparently. The notion being that they're so terrified of what's going on that they're trying to kill themselves in this peculiar fashion, almost like an ostrich burying its head in the sand. It's battle shock.
The Roman consul Paulus was among those killed in battle, perishing under a shower of spears. His co-consul Varro escaped with what remained of the cavalry. The younger Scipio, now an officer, also survived the battle. Just 2 years earlier, he'd rescued his father at Ticinus and fought in the Battle of Trebia. After witnessing the carnage of Cannae, he would be a sworn enemy of Hannibal for the rest of his life. The Roman would never forget the brutality or the brilliance of the Carthaginian commander.
Hannibal's victory at Cannae is one of the supreme military achievements of all time. From a Roman point of view, they never suffer as heavily in any battle. You're talking about somewhere between 60 and 70,000 Romans are lost through being taken prisoner, through being killed in the battle, out of an army of almost 88,000 men. More Romans died in one day of fighting at Cannae than Americans died in combat in the entirety of the Vietnam War.